about Fred's life has been obtained from Fred's son, Ken Naylor, Fred's own voice in an audio interview that was conducted by his granddaughter, Julie, from 1990, as well as autobiography notes written by Fred himself. Frederick Naylor was born on July 17, 1924 at Healy Place in Sheffield, Yorkshire, England. His father, Frank Naylor, and mother, Florence Barker, had another son named Edward shortly afterwards. Fred had various jobs during his teenage years, showing his strong work ethic. At age 14, Fred started working full-time in a cutlery factory. Fred worked 48 hours per week, and after breaking a finger and sustaining an eye injury at this job, he quit after 6 months. At age 16, he started working at Firth Brown Steelware, where he gained valuable experience doing various jobs. During this time, the Second World War had begun, and Fred joined the Civil Defense Force as a messenger boy. It was December 12, 1940, when Fred was working the evening shift and the bombing started. This became known as the Sheffield Blitz, and it was a concentrated attack on Sheffield by the Germans that lasted 3 days. Sheffield was targeted due to being a hub of steel manufacturing that was aiding the war effort. On this evening, when Fred was at work, the bombs were dropping on the other side of the city, and those working Fred's shifts did not know how bad it was. Fred felt it was his duty to be at his home district, so he quickly left and walked home. The city center was burning, but Fred was able to skirt around the fires to make his way home. After he reached home, he heard bombs falling and ducked under a wall. He saw houses burning and tried to help by using a small water hose to put out the fires. However, the water ran out, so his efforts were in vain. His lasting impression was the constant noise of aircraft and the fires in the city center and the brilliant flares that were dropping by the bombers. In the end, it was a scene of devastation, and Sheffield was never the same city again. Fred's bravery on this evening was noticed, and afterwards he received a personal letter from the Civil Defense Office of the Regional Commissioner that said, "Dear Mr. Naylor, your work during the heavy air raid on Sheffield in December 1940 has been brought to my notice, and as Regional Commissioner, I should like to express to you my high appreciation of your courage in fighting a fire single-handed, although the bombing was at its height. I congratulate you on your good work and send you my best wishes." This letter of thanks certainly meant a lot to Fred, as he kept it in safekeeping throughout his entire life. After the Sheffield Blitz, Fred worked long hours making steel for the war effort. By the time that Fred was 18, all of his friends had joined the armed forces. In his own words, Fred wrote, "I had enough of working long hours and wanted to get into the war before it ended. How naive I was in those days." When Fred was 18, he volunteered for service in the British Navy, and he started to serve in August 1942. While in the Navy, Fred served aboard minesweepers, which were naval vessels used to clear sea lanes of mines. The Axis and Allied nations laid a total of more than 550,000 submarine mines in World War II, and the presence of these mines in the sea continued to be a danger even after the war ended. During World War II, Great Britain and their allies lost approximately 1,100 vessels to mines. The minesweeper that Fred served on was a relatively small vessel, and it was equipped with destroying all types of mines. Fred's duties included operating and maintaining the engines, as well as being on lookout and part of the firing party when shooting at the mines with rifles and machine guns. Most of the operations Fred took place in occurred around Britain in the English Channel. In 1944, after D-Day, Fred took part in one of the largest mine-sweeping operations of the war, with over 100 sweepers used. The river was full of mines, as the Germans wanted the Allies to stop using the port of Antwerp, which had been taken by Canadians and the British. As Fred's minesweeper approached, the Germans were firing at some of the sweepers. Gunfire was seen on both sides of the river, and they passed several sunken landing craft. They went by an enemy fortress, and fortunately for Fred's crew, the Germans standing on the fortress were holding a white flag as they were watching Fred's minesweeper go by. They found out later that they had surrendered as they had run out of ammunition. The minesweeping operation went on for 6 weeks, and some minesweepers were lost or heavily damaged. When they finally arrived in Antwerp, they were under heavy attack. When they were arriving at the port, they witnessed an explosion of a V-2 rocket, which was the world's first long-range guided ballistic missile. They stayed in Antwerp for a few days, and they found it far more dangerous due to the V-1 and V-2 rocket attacks than sweeping mines. So Fred remarked that they were glad to get away from there and get back on board their ship. Overall, Fred shared that he liked his time serving in the Navy, traveling from port to port, and seeing different people and places. He especially enjoyed the companionship amongst all the crew, referring to them as his buddies. Fred served the Navy for 4 years, and his service on various vessels took him to Spain, Malta, North Africa, Egypt, southern India, and Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka. When he finally boarded the HMS London and returned to England, Fred shared, "The nicest sight that I ever saw were the green fields of England, and when we got back again. I sure was glad to get back there." During the early days of Fred's service, while at a dance, he met a beautiful woman named Hazel, who served in the Women's Army Auxiliary. Fred and Hazel corresponded by letter from the time he left England until his return, and they married in 1946 when Fred was 22 years old. Fred returned to his old job at Steelware, and in 1947 they had their first son, Ken. Shortly after the birth of Marlene, Fred and Hazel decided they wanted a better life for their family and had their sights set on Canada. In 1956, Fred and his friend came to Kitchener to work. The following year, Fred sent for Hazel and the kids to join him in Canada. They had a third child, Philip, while they were living in Kitchener, and shortly afterwards, Fred and Hazel settled in Guelph to raise their family. Fred worked various jobs to provide for his family, whom he loved very much, including working at the University of Guelph as a blacksmith. Fred was also a farrier on the side and would often shoe Clydesdale horses. Over the years living in Guelph, Fred found much joy out of his life. His hobbies included spending time with his family and grandchildren, going to thrift stores to get the best deals that he could find, doing some ornamental blacksmithing, and oil painting. His paintings focus mainly on beautiful scenes involving boats on the water, likely a result of the lifelong impact and memories that his service on the sea provided. After a short illness, Fred passed away on March 26, 2002 at the age of 77. He was cremated, and his ashes were laid to rest in the mausoleum here at Woodlawn Memorial. Hazel passed away 10 years later, and her ashes are with his. They are memorialized with a photo from their wedding in the niche on the left-hand side where they are interred. Fred's memory lives on in his precious family members, many of whom are here today. And we thank Fred for his bravery, service, and sacrifice. Thank you to the Naylor family for preserving Fred's memory so we can hear his voice and story today.
Thank you, Susan.